Okay, is that good?
Great.
All right, I'm going to read two really short scenes from the novel that I'm working on for my thesis. Let's see. I guess the only thing you need to know is that the protagonist is in a transitional phase in life, and these two scenes contain a friend that's been very important in the last couple of years before the story began. There were a few good spots on the hate and spirit change on rainy days, and I was early enough to secure one of them that day. There weren't as many people out when it was wet outside, especially on a weekday, but those who were out tended to be more generous, especially because I looked really cold. I mean, I was cold, but it really wasn't that bad if you knew what you were doing. It was worth the effort to play up the cold weather for the crowds, though. They didn't know I was wearing long underwear underneath my jeans and my hoodie, and what they didn't know wouldn't hurt them when they brought me hot food and coffee, and especially spare change. This afternoon was a real slow one, until the moment the rain let up, when people crawled out like lizards. Shortly after it stopped raining, an older man with long silvery hair and a matching beard appeared from what seemed like nowhere and silently placed a white pastry bag and a styrofoam cup in my hands. A relic from the 60s, I thought to myself as he winked like we shared a secret and handed me those items. I just smiled, said a quick thanks, and started drinking the coffee immediately so I wouldn't look too warm, well-fed, and comfortable when the next throng of passers-by exited from Positively Hate Street with all those groovy trinkets to prove that they were there in the same place where it all happened back in '69. He must have seen me earlier and walked back from Happy Donuts I got, suddenly wondering how he knew to have an extra coffee and a donut when he passed me by. I was finishing up the maple donut he had given me, which coincidentally is my favorite kind of donut, when the 7-8 minibus pulled up not too far from the sidewalk where I was sitting. Out of the beat-up orange tube tumbled a disheveled-looking guy in a dirty gray suit and fedora hat, which I knew to be stolen from a nearby Goodwill store. Most of the employees there turned a blind eye to homeless shoplifters, as long as they weren't too obvious, and they always had plenty of funky old hats. My friend had a particular affinity for fedora hats. His name was Danny. He was the worst junkie I ever knew. It had been so long since I'd seen Danny, I was actually beginning to worry he might be dead, and he looked not too far from it. He was even thinner than before, and the chocolate brown hair poking out from under his hat looked like it hadn't been brushed in weeks. His face was beaten to a pulp and his hands were scratched, but he was all grins when he spit 2 tiny bulging balloons into his hands in front of me. I just stole this from 2 dealers in the Mission, dude. You wouldn't fucking believe it. They actually thought they were gonna catch me, but those fat fucks didn't realize I used to run track in high school. Ha! Another spot of red-tinged drool dripped into his hand. His azure eyes gazed at the 2 rubber receptacles as if they were a pair of uncut diamonds, shining at him from a clump of newly unearthed soil. Those little gems were all he could see as they swam in the pools of blood and saliva in his palm. I just sat in silence as he recounted the events of the day that had brought him to this moment. I got the balloons in my hand before even paying for them, which was their bad. And even though I had enough for one of them, I knew I wasn't going to pay for that shit. The second they made that mistake, I ran as fast as I fucking could, cat, until I saw a liquor store to duck into, and they fucking chased me right in there like it wasn't nothing. The big one started beating the shit out of me while the other one watched, but I don't even care. As soon as I saw a bus pull up outside, I kicked that motherfucker right in the face. And then the smaller one tried to grab me, but I kicked him in the fucking nuts. And then I bolted for that bus, and I made it just as the door was shutting. It was a 14, so I just took that shit downtown and then caught a bus over here. You wouldn't fucking believe it, cat, he kept repeating. You wouldn't fucking believe it. Come on, you should join me, he added, for old time's sake. No thanks, hon, I responded, and I meant it. I need to get a few dollars together, but thanks for the offer, Dano. You're lost, he said with his eyes down. The balloons were in his pocket now. His eyes gazed into the concrete where his feet were planted for the moment. He breathed heavy. And this is just one other short scene. It's a flashback. One day Danny had invited me to get high in the park with him and 2 junkies he's been hanging out with a lot. These 2 guys looked like they used to be punks, but the junk had distracted them from any sort of identity. So they were nothing but shells covered with needle punctures at that point. The 3 of them had gone in on a rock of tar together, and they had 3 clean needles from the exchange. Naturally, when Danny saw me on their way to the park and invited me to share his portion with him, he had every intention of letting me use his needle first. But when we made it to a safe hiding spot in a cluster of bushes and started preparing everything, he realized his needle was busted. All right, we're just going to have to share, he said, shaking his head, still upset at the circumstances. Cat goes first, he added, looking up. No way, the red-faced, ginger-haired junkie said immediately. We got our clean, so You all can use them after we're done. No, I don't give a shit about what needle I use, but Kat's not using a dirty needle, he continued calmly. She's a fucking girl, man. And a good one. Don't fucking tell me you aren't gonna let her use a clean needle. Before I had a chance to say anything, to tell him I didn't want any trouble, I'll just go get a bottle or something, I don't need to get high today. He took the baggie with all 3 balloons out of his pocket and was waving in their faces. I'm not gonna let you fucking have any of this shit until you hand over a fucking clean needle for her. I'll fucking cut you. He pulled a switchblade from his other pocket and managed to swing it open, all with one hand, and he sat perfectly still, waiting for them to respond. Fuck off, man, said the junkie with the balding brown hair. I'm fucking serious, Danny yelled as he plunged the knife in the air towards their faces. All right, the other junkie finally gave in. Here's a fucking needle for your cunt, bitch. Now give us that shit. Fuck this. With the needle well on our side of the safe spot, he threw their bags at them. They ran off, cursing Danny every step of the way, and probably blowing our cover. Well, we're gonna have to go somewhere else now that those fuckers have blown up this spot, Danny said with a laugh, turning back into the friend I knew as he smiled in my direction.